Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, AVOWED. Hello and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you guys for joining me on the first full-length episode of 2023. Happy New Year, y'all! It's really great to continue another year of the World of Eora as we gear up for the release of AVOWED and also just nerd out about stuff from Pillars of Eternity. For those wondering why we pair all of those games together, it's because they share the same fantasy world that is Eora. And so as the theory goes, if we dive into Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, we can gain some insights, learn about the game mechanics, and make some speculation about what AVOWED might be like as it undergoes development, since they're all sharing the same world. In today's episode, I'm going to be diving into a topic that I've been wanting to do, but it always seemed really daunting, so I'm probably going to break it up into parts. And that is, we're going to be diving into the second Pillars of Eternity game, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, and we're going to be looking at the different factions that exist within the Deadfire itself, starting off with the Huana culture. So to give a little background, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire is the sequel to Pillars of Eternity 1, go figure. It does take place directly after the first game. The narratives are kind of tied together. You don't really need to play the first game to understand the second game. They do spoil a lot of the first game's narrative right at the beginning of the second, but they are tied together in the same world and similar characters, etc., etc. There are a lot of different factions that you will encounter in your travels in the Deadfire Archipelago, this region of the world, which is kind of like a lawless frontier, but in the middle of the ocean. So the four major factions that we'll talk about over the course of a few episodes is the Huana tribes, which are the local native tribes to that area, the two merchant companies from different areas of the world, one being the Vailian Trading Company, which hail from the Vailian Republics, a group of people that you know of a lot from the first game, and the Royal Deadfire Company, which is the official merchant company from the nation of Rauatai, which we didn't get a lot of coverage in the first game, so it's really exciting to be able to play the second game and get a little bit more. The last faction that exists within the Deadfire Archipelago, and you know it has to be there because it's an archipelago, it's a whole bunch of islands in the middle of nowhere, there's not really established law, there's pirates. We have the Principi Sen Patrena, which are kind of like it's kind of like a pirate confederacy that exists from the crumbling old empire of Grand Valia. So those are the ones we have all in all. We have three old empires that exist in this world that have these kind of like new powers springing up in the area, as well as one local native area. And today we're going to be covering a lot about the Huana culture, the local native tribes to the Deadfire Archipelago. With no news to go over for Pillars of Eternity or AVOWED, we're going to jump straight into today's lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
Now, a lot of the information that I'm going to be talking about today comes from the Pillars of Eternity 2 guidebook. So that's the officially published book that goes along with Pillars of Eternity, published by Dark Horse, I believe, for the actual lore and the setting of the Deadfire Archipelago. It just lets you understand a little bit more of what it is your character's walking into. So if you have this book and you read along with it as you play the game, you'll understand the cultures, you'll understand the history, and a little bit more about what's going on. And so we'll be reading a lot of information from there. I'm not going to read all of it because they have a really large entry, and I don't want to get in trouble for reading half of a published book to people for free. So we'll just kind of go through pieces and pieces. A lot of this you can get from the game and all that, so I'm not too worried about that. The word Huana, Huana, is actually a word in the native tongue of the people that live in the region of the Deadfire Archipelago. And it is a word that describes a decentralized population of Amawa. Amawans are a race of people that exist within this fantasy world. If you've been into fantasy games, literature, movies, stuff like that, you're used to seeing things like humans, elves, and dwarves. And in other fantasy worlds, there's always that unique race, the one that stands out. Amawans are one of those unique races. They're these real big, wide humanoid creatures, and they have two-tone skin that the different tones of skin kind of like interweave each other to make unique patterns, and they're often very aquatic. They have webbed hands and toes, and they live near coasts as well as on islands. They're a very interesting race of people, and the Huana peoples are almost entirely Amawans. There are some dwarves and other races that can exist within the native tribes of the Huana, but they're pretty much exclusively island Amawans. And the word Huana describes their culture actually pretty well because, again, the word means decentralized population of Amawa, and that is largely what they are. At one point in ancient history, the Amawans were still around. They were one of the superpowers of the world, at least in their region, and they had a lot more, I guess you could say, success or progressed civilization. They had a lot more of a structured government and a way of living and all that. But, as we'll discuss reading these paragraphs, there is a cataclysm that happened that kind of caused their people to become more of a decentralized kind of just a bunch of island tribes that have a loosely similar government. And so that's kind of how they live now. In this archipelago within the Deadfire, there are all these islands, and these Huana native tribes are, well, they're native to the area. But living from island to island and not having a set government that oversees every minute of every day, a lot of things are different from island to island. There's a lot of tribal living, so there's individual kind of mini governments going on each island. There are unique ways that each tribe lives within their own tribe and how they determine what is right and what is wrong. They still loosely follow the Huana ways, the old traditions and cultures, and the caste system that we're going to talk about. But they're largely in custom, tradition, and geography. They live the way they do from island to island. Amawans have lived in the Deadfire for at least 5,000 years, with the warm-toned island Amawa being the most abundantly represented. Island Amawa is kind of like a sub-race of Amawans in general. In the distant Rawatai, which we've mentioned before, it's one of the old empires, they are mainly comprised of Amawans as well, except they're called coastal Amawas. The cool-toned coastal Amawa are more prevalent. Very ancient voyage logs tell that modern Rawataians sprang up from the tribes of the Deadfire long ago, from which their ancestors emigrated in order to establish their future empire. What force or influence so divided the Huana into distinct nations is not conclusively known, but oral history and geological evidence point toward a natural cataclysm which hit the Deadfire with enough force to scatter its ancient inhabitants. So I kind of alluded to this earlier. The Huana peoples, these Amawans that live here now, their ancient ancestors, as well as the Rawatai, which is another empire in the world we talked about, their ancient ancestors all came from the Deadfire Archipelago 5,000 years ago. But some sort of cataclysm happened that separated everyone. There is some oral history and geological evidence that point towards this. And so something happened to the Huana people and the Huana culture and the Huana civilization that made them completely split off 5,000 years ago, and a whole group of Amawans went somewhere else, and they ended up forming the entire empire that is Rawatai. And they're basically completely different Amawans, even though they're the same species. They're kind of like a subspecies. Now, I'm not going to say what happened now, but suffice it to say, if you play Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, you do learn a little bit more. Obviously, a great mystery like this, there's not something they're going to not talk about within the game. Whether or not they explain everything, though, that's something you'll have to find out the game itself, or I'll put a spoiler episode out so that way anyone listening doesn't have to worry about it. But as a result of this major cataclysm, it has heavily affected the way they live now. So, as we mentioned, these island tribes live from island to island, and they can be vastly different from one place to another. And their oral traditions that they pass down to each other, because this is largely how they pass down information in their culture, means that there can be wildly different stories of what this cataclysm was and what the results of them were, and what caused it, etc., etc. And so you have this entire group of peoples who all look the same, and they have loosely similar governments in some cases, but they're also very inconsistent in what they say is going on and how they live life. And it's kind of walking into this that the Valian Republics and the Royal Deadfire Company, the two merchant groups that come in, kind of see this coming, and they're trying to kind of not invade, but they're trying to enter into the Deadfire Archipelago and use it for their own purposes. And the Huana peoples really need to kind of get their game together, get their story straight, if they're going to be able to stand against or stand for themselves, depending on how they want to handle this. One of the main features of the Huana culture is the caste system. Now, I know that some people out there have a lot of very strong opinions about caste systems in different cultures, and I'm going to try to remain as neutral about it as I possibly can. I actually don't know a lot about caste systems within the world, so I also don't want to speak into that and be insensitive. But this is just the raw data and information that we get from the game itself and the culture that was made for the Huana people over at Obsidian Entertainment. So in the book it says, within any given tribe, the Huana divide themselves along the lines of a rigidly enforced caste system. This organization has been owned over millennia, reinforced by the Huana's sacred regard for Bereth's wheel and the cycle of reincarnation. So Bereth's wheel and the cycle of reincarnation are they're basically synonymous with each other. So if someone says you're entering into Bereth's wheel, it means you died and eventually your soul's going to come back reborn in another person's body. So that's the cycle of reincarnation that exists within this world. At the top of the structure, we have the Mataru, M-A-T-A-R-U. The Mataru are warriors and priests of the Huana tribes. Priests are responsible for every level of religious engagement, from the interpretation of omens to the guiding of prayer and exploration of past lives. So, like I said about Bereth's wheel and the cycle of reincarnation, you die, your soul goes away, comes back, enters into a new body. You can actually, within this world, through special methods, look into past lives of a soul that has a life. So if you have a person in front of you and you know how to do it, you could look into their soul and see what their past lives are. You could measure them, in a sense. They also act as advisors and representatives of divine intention, guiding the tribe in any matter that would require the opinion of the gods. So in this world, like many fantasy worlds, there are deities to be accounted for. There are deities to pray to, be obedient to, talk to, sacrifice to, the whole kit and caboodle. In some fantasy worlds, they're less involved, they're less prominent in the narratives. They're just kind of there as a narrative tool, or they're there for a way to kind of form the culture within the fantasy story that you're creating. In Pillars of Eternity and in Eora, especially from the gameplay perspective, your player character, the gods are very important for the narratives, and you interact with them directly quite often. And so the priests of this Mataru caste would oftentimes try to interpret the omens of what is going on around them and give what the opinions of the gods are. For example, if a person in a tribe is born as a godlike, which is a person born with physiological traits like that of one of the deities, then they might interpret that as an omen. Whether it's positive or negative kind of depends on the circumstance of the birth, maybe the time of the year and the weather, etc., etc. This broadly defined authority, which is the entire Mataru caste, extends to the organization of the caste system. Using a combination of ritual, prayer, and rods of dragon or adragon bone, priests measure the souls of Huana newborns to observe the vibrancy of their infant souls. So, to put it in short, essentially a priest will walk up to a newborn infant Amawa, and they will put up this adragon bone, which is a fantasy creature, an adragon, and they will put up the bone next to the baby, and if it vibrates at a certain intensity, that means your baby is Mataru class, or your baby is one of the other classes. So that's how they measure the soul and determine which caste it belongs into. The bones used in these rituals are nearly impossible to acquire without significant risk, which explains why the tools in circulation have been passed down across generations. So these items used to measure souls would be very sacred in the tribes that are using them. Through this mandatory ritual, priests determine where the Huana newborn fits into the great structure of the tribal society. It is uncommon for a child to be placed in a lower or higher caste than their parents, but such disruptions of the social order do happen and have even halted old and powerful chieftain dynasties. So it sounds like there's a lot of status quo going on here. Most of the time, if you have a child in these tribes, your child will stay within the class that you are, but very rarely, or I guess occasionally, a child can be born and be taken into another caste system. I'm not sure what the particulars of that would look like. I'm pretty sure you get to see some examples of that in-game, but that's more just there for you, the player, the observer, and the audience to wrestle with and think about. Within the Mataru, warriors are responsible for the protection and guidance of a tribe's more practical concerns. Chieftains most commonly spring from the warriors, as their physical strength and tactical reasoning are meant to represent the strength of the tribe. While heritage is a factor in the line of succession, the vigor of the chieftain's heir is taken into account through the combination of priestly rituals and physical trials before they are allowed to ascend. If the heir is found lacking in essentials, then the eligible warriors compete for right to lead. Both men and women can serve as chieftains, provided they are part of the Mataru caste. So there you have it. So we first talked about the priests, now we're talking about the warriors. In order to be a warrior for the Huana peoples, you have to be in the Mataru caste, first off, and you have to be I suppose, approved by the priesthood first. So they have to like measure your soul, and then they have to pray to the gods or perform some rituals and get an opinion of the deities to get the green light for you. And then you also have to be able to pass a series of physical tests to prove that you are strong enough to be a chieftain. But if you're a chieftain in this tribe, you're very high up on the food chain, as it were. The middle caste, or the Kuaru class, is reserved for respectable artisans and merchants. Within the Kuaru, that's Kuaru, a child will most often take up the vocation of their parents unless there is a surplus in one practice and a gap needed to be filled elsewhere. The differences are not made up by personal choice or innate talent, but by the guidance of the Mataru. So it sounds like the Kuaru are kind of like they're the middle class. So, they're the merchants, they are the artisans, they're the people that are help shaping the culture, they are the people who are serving the Motaru class, but they're also being served by the caste below them. And they don't have, as it seems, the same autonomy that the Motaru have. So it says here that if there is, let's say, a whole bunch of blacksmiths, when we don't need any more blacksmiths, we need other trades. Well, if, let's say, you're one of the Kuaru, you don't get to say, well, I'm really good at baking, so I think maybe I'll be a baker. No, you'll go to the Mataru. The Mataru will assess what is needed, and they'll tell you what trade you're going to go into. And that's kind of how that works. So there's a level of autonomy we see that's being taken away. And apparently, this is just how the Huana live. They embrace this way of living. The lowest caste in this system is the Roparu. The Roparu, Roparu, are the unskilled laborers of the Huana society who work for more menial jobs that are nevertheless essential to Deadfire life. This class serves an unforgiving but important survival role. During lean times when harvests fail or food is simply wanting, the Roparu are those designated to go hungry, even to the point of death by starvation. Outsiders may view this structure and its responsibilities with disapproval, but even the Roparu do not question their place in the order of society. It is known and accepted that the souls of the Roparu will be reborn to a tribe in a loftier caste, as the gods recognize their labor and toil. So that's where I think a lot of controversy comes in when playing this game, is the way the Roparu class are treated. These are the unskilled laborers. These are the people that do the grunt work. These are the people that they're at the bottom of the food chain, and quite literally, if there is not enough food to go around, they are the last ones to receive it, if there is even any left. And it is expected that the Roparu will go hungry, if need be, even to the point of death. And that's pretty serious. Now, but if you stop and take a step back, there is a logic and a reasoning behind it. The idea being that there's not enough food to go around, people are going to die anyways. So why don't we designate which people are to die and which people are not to die? Not necessarily out of a case of mercilessness, but that way we know who is going to be alive and who is not. There's no fighting over it. It's just everyone knows their place. And the people that quote-unquote need to stay alive will stay alive. They'll have the food. And the ones that are, I guess you could say, disposable, but I don't want to use that word, and I don't think they would want to either, they will die. And since there is a cycle of reincarnation, it is accepted and believed that the people born into these lower castes will be reborn into another caste anyways. So if you're living as a Roparu and you happen to be living in the time of a famine and you die of starvation, well, it's just net gain, because now you're going to be born into a higher caste. You might be a Kuaru or a Mataru. Now, to be fair, you don't transfer memories from one life to another. Like, you only have the one existence that you're aware of, and that one life is the only one that you know you have. So that kind of sucks. But I understand the logic that's going on here. I don't necessarily know if I agree with it, but there it is. That's what they're going with. And I remember in playing the game that there were a lot of people in Huana that my character ran into that were Roparu, and they were fine with this system. They're like, no, this is how it goes. There's not enough food to go around, so not everyone can eat. And I happily will be one of the people that can't eat so that others can stay alive and keep this culture going. So some people accept it, others not so much. And before we close off this section of lore with Huana, I'm going to talk about the major city that is in the Pillars of Eternity game, as well as kind of the beacon within the Huana society, the city of Nekataka. And the city of Nekataka is very important to the Huana people for their continued existence, but it's also very counter to the way that they live. And we're going to read as to why. So the city of Nekataka is this massive city on one of the major islands in the Deadfire Archipelago. And it has stone walls and stone streets, and it has established buildings for businesses and the Water Shapers Guild and temples, etc., etc., etc. The reason that this is important is because the island tribes of the Huana are a little more nomadic more often than not. They build wooden huts that can be picked up and moved to the other side of the island. They don't build walls that encase area. They kind of just live out in the open, and if they need to be safe, they move inland for security. So the city of Nekataka, being stone walls and stone floors and ground and all that kind of stuff, is already kind of odd in their culture and doesn't really belong. But this is a city, if I remember correctly, that's got an ancient history to it, and it's there, and it's useful, and it serves its purpose because this is where the royalty of the Huana live, and this is also the place where the Valian Trading Company and the Royal Deadfire Company come to issue trade and engage in political machinations between all of the people that are in the Deadfire. And so it has a very precise reason for being there, but it's also very counter to the way Huana live. And as well, it's in the city of Nekataka that we see the most dramatic shift in how the caste system works. Because I brought up the caste system earlier, and we have the Mataru, the Kuwaru, and the Roparu. And I know that it was really easy to think the Roparu were treated really badly because they were the lowest caste and they did the really stupid work and blah, 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 blah. But there's actually nothing in here that says that they were treated badly. And actually, reading one of the journal excerpts that are within this book, it's kind of like a little flare on the side, we actually find out that chieftains of some of the island societies would welcome the Roparu to, communal feasts, like one of the people, because togetherness is an important virtue within their culture. And so the Roparu, even though they have their spot in the society and they are expected to live to that spot in the society, they're still treated as equals in many islands. Some islands, obviously, probably not. But the city of Nekataka is different because of the way the city is structured and the fact that people are trying to maintain businesses there and not have it go out of business instead of just moving to a new place on the island like you might somewhere else in the Deadfire. The differences between the classes get more and more exaggerated. And so you have the Mataru living at the top of this island at the Serpent's Crown, and that's where the royalty is. That's where the priesthood and the warriors are trained. And then you have the Kuwaru that are living over in Pariki's Overlook, and they have buildings that they've set up shops in, and they have permanent establishments they're trying to maintain, things like that. And then you have the Roparu, who are living in this place called the Gullet, which already sounds like a place you probably don't want to live in. And it is about as bad as you think it is. They actually live over top of a big hole in the island where apparently an ancient city lives below, and it's just filled with rotten, awful creatures. And these people are living in squalid conditions. They have this kind of scaffolding area that they've made that holds up their houses above this area, and it's just falling apart constantly. It's not a good area to live in. And so the city of Nekataka is not able to have a society just within their walls where the castes are as equal. And this leads to a lot of problems and conflicts within the game's narrative. And especially when you take into consideration that these outside influences, the Valian Trading Company and the Royal Deadfire Company, and even the Principe Sempetrena, the Criminal Pirate Association, or I guess Confederacy, sorry, these outside influencers are coming in, and the Huana peoples are seeing the way these other people live. Look at the Royal Deadfire Company. They're over down on the other side of the city. And the working class over there get treated fine. How come I have to live in this condition where I don't think I can feed my child? Because it's really easy. Well, it's not really easy, but it's a lot easier as a Roparu to accept your place in the caste system and accept who you are and that you might have to starve to death for the betterment of your people. It's easier to accept that when it's just you. But all of a sudden, when you have, let's say, a wife and a child, and you have your infant baby there, and you're like, I need to feed this child that I love with my whole life, and I can't, it's all of a sudden really hard to accept that. And then these strangers come out of town, and they are just planted on your shore, and they seem to be taking care of each other in kind of a little more equal way. Obviously, the Royal Deadfire Company and Valian Trading Company have their issues, and they have their inequality in them. But to a Roparu, or even a Kuwaru or a Mataru, that doesn't necessarily translate well. They might see that and think, oh, this is a dangerous idea, or oh, I want that, or I want to keep this away from my people. And so it introduces a lot of conflict into the narrative, which your player character, as you expect, does deal with, and you make some pretty strong decisions within the game, especially if you do all the side content. Okay, now that's all we're going to talk about for the Huana today. There's still a lot more to go over, though, so I'm probably going to move it into a part 2, but I've already been recording for about half an hour, and there's still half the content left. So we still have things to go over, such as what are the virtues and the vices of the Huana peoples, as well as some of the standout characters in the Huana peoples, some of their history, which might include spoilers, so I don't want to get into that right off the bat. Their religious systems, etc., etc. So there's a lot of things to go over, and that's not even touching on the other factions themselves, which we will get into. And then there's also the history of the Deadfire. There's a lot between these two games. We got lots of content that we can discuss before AVOWED even comes out. Well, I hope so, depending on how long AVOWED's going to be, but we'll see. So now, with this all said, is there anything that we can talk about with the Huana that might tie towards AVOWED?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
As you may have suspected, there's not a ton that we can say for sure is going to be in the game of AVOWED that have to do with the Huana. There is a chance, though. So depending on whether it's a prequel or sequel to the Pillars of Eternity games will matter first off. If AVOWED is a prequel, then if it's set very, very, very distant in the past, back when the Huana peoples had a mega society and they were very powerful within the world, then we might actually be dealing with some of their influences. And as Obsidian releases and teases information about the game as it's undergoing development, if we see any signs of the Huana being a worldwide superpower, it'll give us a really strong indication of the setting in terms of time when the game's going to be played. But as well, even if it's a prequel, there is always the chance that we will run into Huana peoples anywhere in the world of Eora. So if AVOWED is even set on the opposite side of the world, there's a chance that we'll be seeing things or people from the Deadfire Archipelago, including Huana peoples, over on that side of the world, getting to see what it's like when a couple of foreigners come into town and they need help because they're getting taken advantage of or something or other. And your player character can jump into that and have a say, you know? And I think Obsidian would do something along those lines. They might not make them from the Huana necessarily, but it's an option. As well, the Deadfire Archipelago and the Huana peoples are... It's kind of a powder keg going on there during the time of the game. There's a really hot commodity over there called Luminous Audra, and everyone wants to get their hands on it. But, of course, the native tribes, the Huana people, they want to maintain the integrity of their homeland, but they also want to have control of their own commodities, right? So there might be a lot of kind of political things going on in the game of AVOWED because the Valiant Trading Company might be getting created, and people are trying to recruit others to go down over there, and maybe you could pledge your allegiance to that company, and you'll affect stuff like that. Who knows, right? There is the obvious thing that in AVOWED we might actually get to go to the Deadfire Archipelago or be playing there. I highly doubt that. Based off of the reveal trailer, it seems like we're definitely not playing in the Deadfire Archipelago, but to be fair, we don't know that the reveal trailer is actually indicating anything specific about AVOWED other than the fact that it's being made. As well, we don't know what kind of DLCs the game's going to come out with. If AVOWED has a DLC, there might be one that takes us over to the Deadfire Archipelago where we can interact with the people of the Huana culture. And then knowing all this information will be helpful to you. But my prediction is that there's not going to be a ton that have to do with the Huana people in AVOWED. So a lot of this episode is just for those Pillars of Eternity geeks out there like me, or if you are trying to develop a tabletop role-playing game and you want to use another culture for inspiration, or you want to like take the Huana culture and kind of homebrew it into your own D&D game or something like that, then there you go. But as well, we really don't know what AVOWED's going to have in it. We don't know where in the world it's going to be played. We don't know when in the world it's going to be played, because if AVOWED is a sequel, then there's some stuff that goes on in Pillars of Eternity 2 in the Deadfire that is going to impact the entire globe. I'm not going to say anything that it is. I mean, like, this is pretty standard issue stuff because you become the hero of the universe in all these games, right? But like, there are decisions, even decisions about which trading company your player character helps grow in power of, like that matters because this is a worldwide mercantile company. And so things like that might affect it if AVOWED is a sequel to the Pillars of Eternity games. But that's everything I have to say about the Huana peoples that live in the Deadfire Archipelago. Thank you everyone for listening to this episode. I've really been looking forward to this, although it seems like a daunting task because the Huana culture, like Obsidian knocked it out of the park. If anyone at Obsidian is listening that worked on that or knew of work that went on that or was on the research team for any of it. It's crazy how good of a job they did, and how, in my opinion, very respectful as well. I know I remember seeing a post somewhere on the internet about how they were trying to be very careful about taking inspiration from all these other cultures, but not being disrespectful about it or speaking into an area that they had no right to speak into. I'm not from any cultures that they took inspiration from, so I can't really say. I know I wasn't offended, but of course I had no reason to be offended. But I feel like they did a good job in honoring the inspirations they took it from, and that they did a good job of just creating their own original culture for people to engage with. I still remember my adventures through Pillars of Eternity 2 engaging with this Huana culture and having moral quandaries in my own mind and trying to decide how would my character also do this kind of stuff. And it was very compelling. And honestly, it's the Huana culture is one of the main reasons that I come back to the second Pillars game to replay the narratives, because I just want to learn more about these people and see what the stories are behind the scenes. So thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. Nothing to go over here at the end of the episode. I don't currently have any YouTube projects going on, nothing new about the show. I do have some things down the pipeline that I'm hoping to introduce in this new year. You know, it's a new year, want to do new things for the show. No resolutions or stuff like that, just wanting to improve. But I'm always open to suggestions. So if anyone out there listening wants to get involved with the show, has ideas for the show, has comments on the show or the lore, anything like that, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. You can also reach me on Twitter @worldofeora. I love having conversations about this stuff, and I love working together with people on projects. If you have a project you're working on, especially if it's Eora related, let me know, and I'll probably give you a shout out. As far as personal stuff goes, not a lot going on. I didn't mention in my previous episodes, so I told you guys a long time ago that I got wrist tendonitis from working at UPS, and as my wrist tendonitis was healed and I was going through physiotherapy to get my strength back, I fell down on a sidewalk and I broke my arm. And I didn't trip on a rock or my shoelaces or my feet or slip on ice. I tripped on flat ground and just landed right on my elbow. You can laugh, it's okay. My wife laughed in the hospital in front of the nurses because it's funny, and I even know it was funny. As far as fractures go, though, it's really minor, so everything's okay. I'm still able to record and edit and stuff like that. It's just, it sucked. But, oh well, I got a little bit of home time, so I finished off Grounded. I'm going to move into a new game, thinking Stranded Deep, or, I have God of War sitting on my PlayStation's hard drive, and I don't really know why, but I don't want to play it right now. I think UPS peak season is just too stressful. I want a game that doesn't require any sort of emotions whatsoever, so we'll see. I have Ratchet and Clank. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know. Anyways, sorry. Don't need to bore you with that details. That's just what's going on. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode about the Huana culture from the second Pillars of Eternity game. Will we see them in AVOWED? Probably not, but there's a chance that there might be influences, and who knows? And it's all just geeky stuff. We love it anyways, right? Thanks for being with me, guys. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you next time.